Carol Burnett made millions laugh for over a decade. But in 1977, she filmed something so raw, so heartbreaking, that she's refused to watch it ever since. Not once. Not in 47 years. The audience called it genius. Critics called it legendary. But for Carol, it was too close to home. What was in that sketch? And why did America's funniest woman decide she could never face her own performance again? Carol Burnett was born on April 26, 1933 in San Antonio, Texas. If you only knew her later as the Queen of Comedy, you might imagine a childhood filled with laughter. But Carol's early years were anything but funny. Her parents, both alcoholics, could barely take care of themselves, let alone a daughter. Her father drifted between odd jobs, often at movie theaters, but he couldn't hold steady work. Her mother, obsessed with becoming a Hollywood writer, drowned her frustrations in bottles of liquor. By the time Carol was a toddler, she had already absorbed one cruel lesson. She wasn't her parents' first priority. The bottle was. When her parents finally gave up, she was taken in by her grandmother, Mabel White. In 1940, the two of them left Texas for Hollywood. But there was no glittering red carpet waiting. Instead, they moved into a rundown boarding house where addicts, the mentally ill, and desperate drifters filled the hallways. For $20 a week, they lived in a single cramped room. This was the backdrop of Carol's childhood: poverty, instability, and neglect. Yet in the midst of despair, her grandmother gave her something priceless: unconditional love. And Carol? She discovered something even more powerful: imagination. In the peeling walls of that shabby boarding house, she invented an escape: a twin sister named Karen. Karen was everything Carol wasn't: confident, glamorous, always in control. Carol made her alter ego so convincing that other tenants believed Karen existed. She would scramble up the fire escape, change outfits, and reappear moments later as Karen, dazzling the house. Then she'd switch back into shy, quiet Carol. That was her first stage, and it revealed the spark that would one day make her unstoppable. But life didn't get easier. Her grandmother and she survived on pennies. Every Saturday, they'd scrape together 25 cents each for a movie ticket, more than 10% of their entire weekly income. For Carol, those hours inside a theater were a miracle. She left behind peeling paint, empty cupboards, and fear. Instead, she was transported to a world where Fred Astaire danced, Judy Garland sang, and magic lived. But when the credits rolled, survival returned. So desperate were they for basics that they quietly stole toilet paper from the theater bathrooms. Carol understood early: dreams were priceless, but survival was unforgiving. One day, while watching Tarzan, she heard Johnny Weissmuller's famous jungle yell. That sound became her obsession. At home, she practiced until she perfected every pitch and rhythm. She didn't know it yet, but she was training her diaphragm, mastering vocal control, building a foundation that would later serve her in comedy sketches. That silly yell would eventually bring audiences to tears of laughter. But back then, it was just a little girl trying to find her voice. By the time she finished high school, Carol had a plan. She would study journalism at UCLA. Her mother had once dreamed of being a writer, and Carol felt obligated to carry that dream forward. But when enrollment day came, reality struck. Tuition was $50. She had nothing close to it. That might have been the end. But fate intervened. Out of nowhere, a stranger, someone whose identity she never discovered, paid her tuition. No strings attached, just enough to change her entire life. At UCLA, she started studying journalism, but destiny had other ideas. A single elective theater class changed everything. On that stage, something clicked. She wasn't poor, invisible Carol anymore. She was funny, commanding, alive. Professors noticed. Classmates couldn't look away. Soon, journalism looked too small. She switched to theater. By the end of her freshman year, she was named Most Promising Newcomer. It wasn't just a title, it was validation. For the first time, someone told her she was special, and she believed it. But she was still broke. Working as an usherette for 65 cents an hour, she pinched pennies to survive. And then at a party in San Diego, her life took another wild turn. Carol wasn't there to celebrate. She was sneaking hors d'oeuvres into her purse to take home to her grandmother. A sharply dressed stranger approached. He wasn't in showbiz. He was a millionaire shipbuilder from La Jolla. Carol confessed she dreamed of New York, but couldn't even afford UCLA's tuition. He offered her something insane, $1,000 each for her and her boyfriend, Don Soroyan. There were conditions. 6,292. Never reveal his name. 6,293. Use the money only to get to New York. 6,294. If they made it, they had to help others in return. She accepted. In 1954, Carol left UCLA and boarded a train to New York with Don. She had no contacts, no money, no safety net. I didn't know enough to be scared, she later said. It was the kind of leap only the desperate and the destined can make. In New York, she checked into the Algonquin Hotel. $9 a night drained her savings fast. Soon she was crying in phone booths, begging family for help. She almost gave up, but then came a sign. A hurricane named Carol was moving up the coast. She took it as destiny telling her to stay. She landed at the Rehearsal Club, a boarding house for aspiring actresses. For $18 a week, she shared a cot, a closet, and a bathroom with 4 other girls. But for Carol, it was paradise compared to her couch back home. Days were spent auditioning, nights were spent working as a hat check girl. In 1955, the girls of the Rehearsal Club staged a showcase and mailed invitations to agents. Big names like Marlene Dietrich showed up. That night, Carol's future cracked open. Her big break came from Something Absurd, a joke love song about U.S. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles. She sang it with such over-the-top perfection that audiences roared. Soon she was invited on The Jack Paar Show and The Ed Sullivan Show. On Sullivan's stage in 1957, she was so nervous her knees knocked. But by the end, audiences howled with laughter. That night, Carol Burnett wasn't just a struggling actress anymore. She was the talk of New York. By 1959, after years of scraping by in New York, Carol landed a role that would change her life forever. The off-Broadway musical Once Upon a Mattress was a quirky, low-budget show no one expected to succeed. Carol played Princess Winifred, a clumsy, loud, unconventional character who was the opposite of every dainty fairy tale princess audiences had seen before, and she crushed it. Her fearless performance was so magnetic that audiences couldn't take their eyes off her. The show exploded, moving to Broadway and earning Carol her first Tony nomination. Critics might have been lukewarm, but theatergoers couldn't get enough. For Carol, it wasn't just success, it was proof she could hold an entire show on her shoulders. And just 5 years after she received that mysterious $1,000 loan to chase her dreams, she repaid it in full. True to the stranger's conditions, she never revealed his name. He remained anonymous, content to have given a struggling girl the chance to change her destiny. By then, Carol was making $500 a week, a fortune compared to the days she and her grandmother had survived on $20. But Broadway was only the beginning. Television was calling, The Gary Moore Show. In 1959, Carol joined The Gary Moore Show, a variety series that would transform her from a promising actress into a household name. For 3 years, Carol delivered skits, characters, and musical numbers that showcased her range. She became known for her charwoman character, a cleaning lady with a mischievous charm and unexpected wisdom. It was a role that audiences adored, and one that would stay with her for the rest of her career. But The Gary Moore Show gave Carol more than just exposure. It gave her an education. Watching Moore interact with the audience before each taping, she learned how to improvise, how to work a crowd, and how to build intimacy, even in a massive studio. It was here that she discovered the power of breaking the fourth wall, something she would later perfect in her own variety show. By the time she won her first Emmy in 1962, Carol wasn't just a rising star. She was a proven talent in an industry where women rarely commanded the stage. Julie and Carol at Carnegie Hall, 1962. In the early 60s, Carol teamed up with another rising star, Julie Andrews. At the time, CBS executives doubted Andrews' fame, but Carol pushed for the collaboration. The result was Julie and Carol at Carnegie Hall, 1962. The special was a smash. Their chemistry lit up the stage. They weren't rivals, as executives had feared. They were partners, playing off each other's strengths with effortless timing. The special won 3 major awards, including an Emmy, and Columbia Records released the soundtrack. That night, Carol proved she could stand side by side with the best in the business and sometimes outshine them. The Carol Burnett Show on September 11, 1967. The Carol Burnett Show premiered on CBS. Nobody could have predicted what would follow. For 11 straight seasons, from 1967 to 1978, Carol ruled television. Every week, 30 million people tuned in. It wasn't just a hit, it was a phenomenon. At a time when most variety shows were hosted by men, Carol broke through the glass ceiling. She wasn't just the star, she was the engine, the anchor, the heart. The format was simple but revolutionary: comedy sketches, musical numbers, guest stars, and Carol's signature Q&A sessions with the audience. That opening segment, where she'd step out, answer questions, and banter live, wasn't scripted. It was Carol at her most authentic, and viewers adored her for it. Critics recognized the show as groundbreaking. Time magazine would later name it one of the 100 best TV shows of all time. TV Guide ranked it at number 17. Variety listed it at number 23. But perhaps the most telling recognition came in the form of awards. Over its run, the show won 25 Primetime Emmys, a staggering number that cemented its place in TV history. But beyond the accolades, the show launched careers and created unforgettable television moments. Carol surrounded herself with some of the finest comedic talents of the era. Harvey Korman, Tim Conway, and Vicki Lawrence weren't just sidekicks. They were essential ingredients in the magic. Korman, a master of straight-man comedy, nearly walked away from the show during season 7. During a rough rehearsal, he confessed he wasn't happy and stormed off. Carol, unwilling to tolerate diva behavior, fired him on the spot. But by Monday, he came back, literally skipping and whistling down the CBS hallway, just as Carol had demanded. The moment became a turning point in their relationship, solidifying both his loyalty and her reputation as a leader who could balance firmness with humor. Then there was Tim Conway, the unpredictable wild card. He had a rule: never give his best during rehearsals. He saved his wildest, funniest bits for the live tapings, which often left his co-stars struggling to keep a straight face. His improvised elephant story during a sketch remains one of the most famous unscripted moments in TV history, pushing even the stone-faced Korman to tears of laughter. And then, of course, Vicki Lawrence, the teenage fan who had written Carol a letter in high school and ended up becoming an essential cast member. Together, they built a family of performers whose chemistry felt effortless. What made the Carol Burnett Show stand out wasn't just its comedy, it was its warmth. Unlike many sketch shows that relied on cutting satire, Carol's show blended humor with humanity. Characters like the charwoman weren't just jokes, they were little pieces of empathy wrapped in comedy. Every week, viewers didn't just laugh, they felt connected. And in an era of Vietnam headlines, Watergate scandals, and social upheaval, that connection mattered. But behind the laughter, Carol was carrying more than anyone realized. Success on screen didn't erase the chaos in her personal life. By the mid-1970s, Carol had endured the collapse of her first marriage, the pressures of raising children, and the constant scrutiny of tabloids. In 1976, the National Enquirer ran a fabricated story claiming Carol had been drunk in public. She sued for $1.6 million, not because of the money, but because the accusation cut deep. Having grown up with alcoholic parents, she had dedicated much of her life to speaking out against addiction. To be falsely branded as a hypocrite was intolerable. The lawsuit dragged on for 5 years. She eventually won, though the settlement was reduced to about $200,000. Still, the case changed tabloid journalism forever, forcing publications to reckon with accountability. But that legal battle was only one part of her storm. At home, Carol was facing something even more devastating: her teenage daughter, Carrie's escalating drug addiction. By 13, Carrie was using cocaine, marijuana, and pills. Carol did everything she could: rehab centers, interventions, even tough love that temporarily broke their relationship. It was a silent war she fought behind the curtain while still walking on stage every week to make millions laugh. By 1977, the Carol Burnett Show was entering its 10th season. The formula was strong, the cast was polished, and audiences still adored it. But Carol wanted to take a risk. She had built her empire on laughter, but sometimes comedy can only mask pain for so long. That risk took the form of a recurring sketch series on the show, The Family. In these sketches, Carol played Eunice Higgins, a bitter, insecure woman trapped in a dysfunctional household with her domineering mother, played by Vicki Lawrence, and her hapless husband, played by Harvey Korman. The sketches were darker than most of the show's material, portraying family dysfunction with biting humor. Audiences loved them because they felt real, raw, and unpolished. But in 1977, the tone shifted. The episode was called The Gong Show, a parody of the popular amateur talent competition of the era. In it, Eunice believed that singing on the show would finally be her ticket out of a small, suffocating life. She dreamed of being recognized, validated, applauded. For once, her bitterness would melt into triumph. But it didn't. Instead, the sketch unfolded as a nightmare. The judges mocked her performance. One was played by real-life game show host Alan Ludden, which blurred the lines between fiction and reality even further. Carol didn't play Eunice with a silly accent or over-the-top pratfalls. She played her straight, wounded, humiliated, and crushed. By the end, Eunice's makeup was streaked with tears. The camera pulled back slowly as the lights dimmed. No laughter, no applause, just silence. The studio audience sat stunned. They weren't sure if they were supposed to laugh, cry, or applaud. The crew backstage fought back tears. And Carol Burnett herself, who had spent a lifetime turning pain into comedy, admitted later that she had poured too much of her real self into the performance. She never watched the sketch again, not once in 47 years. To understand why the episode haunted Carol, you have to understand her history. Eunice Higgins wasn't just a character, it was Carol's reflection. Carol had grown up in poverty, with alcoholic parents who abandoned her. She knew what it felt like to dream of something bigger, only to be laughed at. She knew humiliation. She knew desperation. Eunice's fragile hope on that stage mirrored Carol's own hope as a child, sitting in the dark of a movie theater, dreaming of escape while stealing toilet paper to survive. In a 2010 interview, Carol explained, "Eunice's pain felt like my own. It was too real. I couldn't watch it. Comedy had always been her shield. By exaggerating, by laughing, by turning misery into absurdity, she could distance herself from the heartbreak. But this time, there was no shield. The sketch stripped away the comedy and exposed the wound, and Carol couldn't bear to look at it again. Viewers at home were stunned. Critics hailed the sketch as one of the most daring things ever attempted on a variety show. They praised Carol's bravery, her willingness to drop the mask of comedy and play pure tragedy. But Carol didn't see it as bravery. She saw it as too much honesty. In her own words, that wasn't what our show was about. We were there to make people forget their troubles, not remind them. Still, the sketch became legendary. It lingered in the cultural memory, referenced by critics and fans alike as proof that the Carol Burnett show wasn't just fluff, it had depth, range, and the power to move. The impact didn't stop there. The character of Eunice became the centerpiece of a 1982 television movie titled Eunice, and later inspired the sitcom Mama's Family starring Vicki Lawrence. Carol herself eventually distanced from the sitcom, unhappy with its lighter tone. But the original episode remained iconic. Behind the scenes, the sketch represented more than just a one-off performance. It symbolized the tension Carol carried her entire career, the balance between laughter and pain. She was America's clown, the woman who could turn anything into comedy, but she was also the little girl who had survived abandonment, poverty, and humiliation. Playing Eunice on that stage in 1977 blurred the lines. Between the two, for once, the clown stopped laughing, and the world saw the woman behind the mask. That's why she never rewatched it. It wasn't just a sketch. It was her life reflected back at her. After the episode aired, Carol didn't dwell on it. She returned the next week with sketches filled with slapstick, music, and joy. But the memory lingered. She admitted in later interviews that the pain of that episode stayed with her for decades. Her audience might have wanted more of that raw honesty, but Carol didn't. She knew her role. "We were there to make people laugh," she insisted. "That's what I wanted to give." And so she buried Eunice's heartbreak, at least publicly, under layers of humor and spectacle. Yet the ripple effect of that one sketch couldn't be erased. It showed the depth of her talent, her ability to command not just laughter, but silence, not just smiles, but tears. It proved that Carol Burnett wasn't just a comedian, she was an actress of staggering emotional range. In many ways, the sketch revealed a truth about Carol Burnett herself. She wasn't just funny, she was deeply empathetic. She felt too much, cared too much, and carried her pain too close to the surface. That's what made her comedy so powerful. She wasn't mocking pain from the outside, she was transforming pain from the inside. Every pratfall, every silly face, every sketch was rooted in the knowledge of what it feels like to suffer. And that's why the 1977 episode was too much. Because for once, she didn't transform it. She let the suffering stand naked, and she couldn't bear to see it again. Today, that single episode is remembered as one of the most unforgettable moments of her career. It led to spin-offs, inspired other shows, and became a case study in how comedy and tragedy can intertwine. But for Carol, its legacy is different. It's a reminder that even the strongest comedians have limits, that sometimes laughter isn't enough to hide the scars. And perhaps that's why fans still talk about it. Because in that moment, Carol Burnett wasn't just the queen of comedy, she was human. After 1977, The Carol Burnett Show ran for one more season before ending in 1978. It went out on top, sweeping multiple Emmy categories and securing Carol's place in television royalty. But Carol herself was exhausted. She had carried the weight of comedy, family, and personal demons for too long. That 1977 sketch was the crack in the armor. It revealed the pain she could no longer completely hide. Even so, she didn't let it define her. She chose to move forward, to focus on joy, and to keep creating. Because if there's one thing Carol Burnett has always known, it's that survival sometimes depends on laughter, even when the tears never really disappear. On March 29, 1978, The Carol Burnett Show aired its final episode. After 11 years, 30 million weekly viewers, and 25 primetime Emmys, the curtain fell. Carol went out on top. But behind the scenes, she was worn down. The weight of balancing stardom, family crises, and personal struggles had become overwhelming. The decision to end the show was bittersweet. She had created one of the most iconic television programs in history, yet she was haunted by the 1977 sketch she never revisited and the growing storms in her private life. What came next would test her more than any stage or spotlight ever had. Carol's personal life was often as dramatic as the characters she portrayed. Her first marriage to Don Saroyan, her college sweetheart, ended in 1962 after just 7 years. Don's career stalled while Carol's soared, and the pressure fractured their relationship. Don later battled alcoholism and depression until his death in 1990. Soon after her divorce, Carol met Joe Hamilton, a television producer who had worked on her Carnegie Hall concert. They married in 1963 and went on to have 3 daughters, Carrie, Jody, and Erin. But Joe already had 8 children from his previous marriage, and their household was a whirlwind of chaos. Joe was also the executive producer of The Carol Burnett Show, which meant their professional and personal lives were completely intertwined. At first, this partnership worked. They were a power couple, raising children while shaping television. But the cracks grew deeper with time. By the mid-1970s, their marriage was faltering under the weight of career pressures, family responsibilities, and emotional strain. They divorced in 1984. Joe remained close to the family until his death from cancer in 1991. But the breakup left scars. In 1976, even before the end of her show, Carol had found herself battling a very public enemy, the National Enquirer. The tabloid printed a false story claiming that Carol had been drunk and belligerent in a Washington, D.C. restaurant, loudly insulting then Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. For a woman who had grown up with alcoholic parents and who had spent years speaking out against addiction, the accusation was devastating. Carol fought back. She sued the National Enquirer for $1.6 million in damages. The case dragged on for 5 years, pulling her through depositions, appeals, and courtroom battles. Ultimately, she won. The settlement was reduced to about $200,000 after appeals, but money was never the point. She had cleared her name and forced tabloids to take responsibility for reckless reporting. It was one of the earliest high-profile victories against tabloid journalism, and it changed the rules of the industry. But for Carol, it was yet another exhausting battle fought on top of everything else. While lawsuits and divorces made headlines, Carol's most heartbreaking fight was private. Her eldest daughter, Carrie Hamilton, began struggling with drug addiction as a teenager. By 13, Carrie was using cocaine, marijuana, mushrooms, and pills. Carol did everything she could. She sent Carrie to rehab facilities across the country. She tried interventions. She tried tough love. At one point, Carrie even ran away from a treatment center. Carol later said, "You have to love them enough to let them hate you." For over a year, she and Carrie didn't speak. Carol feared she had lost her daughter forever. But Carrie pulled through. By 17, she was sober. The road back wasn't easy, but mother and daughter rebuilt their relationship. They became close, even collaborators. They co-wrote Hollywood Arms, a play based on Carol's childhood, and acted together in television projects. Carrie went on to a successful career in her own right, starring in the TV series Fame and appearing in films. She was radiant, talented, and full of life. But tragedy struck again. In 2002, at just 38 years old, Carrie died from pneumonia caused by lung cancer that had spread to her brain. She never lived to see Hollywood Arms open on stage. Carol was devastated. She later admitted that losing Carrie was the darkest chapter of her life. But she pushed forward, saying, "I owed it to Carrie." She made sure the play opened in her honor. Even through heartbreak, Carol found companionship again. In the late 1990s, she met Brian Miller, a musician 23 years her junior. They married in 2001. Just 2 months later, Carrie died, and Brian became Carol's rock through the storm. Their marriage has lasted over 2 decades, and Brian has stood beside her during her later career, helping her navigate grief and new beginnings. As if losing Carrie wasn't enough, Carol faced new challenges with her youngest daughter, Erin. Erin struggled with addiction for nearly 20 years, cycling in and out of rehab. At one point, Carol and Brian took custody of Erin's son, Dylan, to provide him with a safe and stable home. Even in her late 80s, Carol was still fighting for her family, stepping into the role of guardian when her daughter couldn't. It was a painful reminder that addiction, something she had known since childhood with her parents, remained a recurring shadow over her life. Even as her personal life was filled with battles, Carol continued to surprise audiences with her range. In the 1990s, she guest starred on Mad About You as Teresa Stemple, Paul Reiser's mother. Her performance was so sharp, so funny, and so real that she won an Emmy in 1997 for Outstanding Guest Actress in a Comedy Series. It proved she wasn't just a sketch comedian from another era, she could thrive in modern sitcoms too. In the 2000s, she lent her voice to animated films like Horton Hears a Who, 2008, introducing herself to a new generation of children. And in 2022, at 89 years old, she stunned fans again with a recurring role in Better Call Saul. As Marion, an elderly but sharp-eyed woman, she slowly unraveled the lies of Saul Goodman. In one unforgettable scene, she quietly pressed her life alert button to turn him in. Critics called it one of the most chilling, brilliant moments in the show's history. Vince Gilligan, the co-creator, admitted it felt awful to write a scene where Saul considered harming Carol Burnett's character. She's an American treasure. And yet Carol delivered, reminding the world that even at nearly 90, she could command a scene with subtlety and power. In 2024, Carol made headlines once again with Apple TV's Palm Royale. At 91 years old, she played Norma Delacorte, a wealthy Palm Beach matriarch who spends much of the series in a coma before dramatically waking. The role demanded both physical comedy and improvisation, including gibberish dialogue she made up on the spot. For her performance, she earned an Emmy nomination for Outstanding Supporting Actress in a Comedy Series, making her the oldest female nominee in Emmy history. The show itself garnered 11 nominations, but once again, Carol stood out as the heartbeat of the cast. Even after 7 decades in show business, she was still breaking records. And yet, through all the triumphs, the awards, the returns, and the comebacks, that 1977 episode still loomed in the background. Carol Burnett has revisited nearly every chapter of her career, her Broadway days, her groundbreaking variety show, her courtroom battles, her family tragedies. She has reflected openly on her pain and her triumphs. But one thing has remained consistent. She has never watched the Gong Show sketch from 1977, because it wasn't just Eunice Higgins's heartbreak, it was hers. Carol Burnett's story is one of contrasts. On stage, she was the queen of comedy, the woman who could make an entire nation forget its troubles for an hour every week. Behind the curtain, she was a survivor of poverty, abandonment, heartbreak, addiction, and grief. That 1977 sketch sits at the center of her legend because it revealed both sides at once. For one rare moment, the mask slipped. The clown stopped smiling, and America saw the pain beneath the laughter. It wasn't just a comedy sketch, it was a mirror. And what Carol saw in it was too close to home. That's why she never watched it again. Most performers spend their lives searching for authenticity, for that one role that shows the world who they truly are. Carol Burnett achieved it accidentally, and she hated it. In Eunice Higgins, she exposed the raw nerve of humiliation, disappointment, and despair. She gave the world a glimpse of her own childhood wounds, her own struggles with rejection and invisibility. Critics called it brilliant, but Carol called it unbearable. Because honesty comes at a price, and for her, the price was too steep. It's impossible to talk about Carol Burnett without acknowledging how she changed television for women. Before her, no woman had anchored a successful primetime variety show. Networks didn't believe audiences would accept a female host commanding sketches, musical numbers, and star guests week after week. Carol proved them wrong. Not just once, but for 11 straight seasons. She didn't just open doors, she kicked them down. Without Carol Burnett, there is no Gilda Radner, no Tina Fey, no Amy Poehler, no Kristen Wiig. She showed the industry that women could be more than sidekicks or supporting players. They could be the center of the comedy universe. But she did it on her own terms. She didn't try to be glamorous or perfect or untouchable. She made funny faces, wore ridiculous costumes, and fell down stairs. She showed that women could be messy, physical, silly, and loud, and still be loved. That authenticity made her a pioneer. Still, Carol's greatest strength wasn't just her comedy, it was her humanity. She knew what it meant to be poor, hungry, and desperate. She knew the sting of rejection, the shame of addiction in her family, and the devastation of losing a child. She carried all of it with her, and it seeped into her performances. That's why audiences connected to her so deeply. She wasn't a distant celebrity, she was relatable. She laughed at herself, she cried openly, and she treated her fans like friends. When she tugged her ear at the end of every show, it was a secret signal to her grandmother back home. A reminder that behind the glitz of Hollywood, she was still just Carol, the girl from San Antonio who once couldn't afford a $50 tuition. The great irony is that the one performance she refused to revisit is the one that revealed her deepest truth. The Gong Show sketch stripped away the costume and left only the pain. And in doing so, it touched audiences in a way that laughter alone never could. For everyone else, it was a triumph. For Carol, it was a wound reopened. Maybe that's the final lesson of her story. Sometimes the things we create for others are too painful for us to face ourselves. Today, Carol Burnett is in her 90s and still performing, still surprising audiences, still redefining what longevity in show business looks like. She has survived longer than her critics, longer than her show, longer than the scandals and the losses. And through it all, she has remained true to the mission she set for herself back in 1967, to make people laugh, to give them relief from their troubles, if only for an hour. That's why she never wanted to repeat the 1977 experiment. She didn't want her show to be about pain. She wanted it to be about joy. And yet that one sketch endures precisely because it broke the rules, because it showed the cost of survival, the truth behind the laughter. Carol Burnett has given us over 7 decades of laughter, resilience, and inspiration. She has survived poverty, heartbreak, addiction, and loss, and still managed to bring joy to millions. But the one thing she's never been able to face is herself in that 1977 sketch. Maybe that's what makes it legendary. Not just that it was performed, but that it was abandoned. Not just that it existed, but that it became a ghost in her own career. And maybe the real question isn't why Carol Burnett refuses to watch it. Maybe the question is, What would happen if she ever did? Would she finally see what the rest of the world saw? A woman whose pain made her performance unforgettable? Or would it still be too raw, too close, too real? That's a question only Carol herself can answer.